Again, it's a rich thing.
What is going on, guys? Welcome to this video. Today I want to talk about something spontaneously here, which is very important, I think, for programmers, and it is the fact that Googling is a superpower. It's not only normal and okay to Google as a programmer, it's also important and necessary to be good at Googling, because Googling is an art form, in my opinion. And today I want to talk a little bit about why Googling is important and how to do it properly. So let's start with a very simple example. I did something to my system which, when I now go ahead and start CMD, for example, and I type in something like, let's navigate to the desktop and to the programming folder and to the Python folder and to the Neural 9 folder. And here I have a bunch of Python files. And what I want to do is I want to execute one of them. And let's say I'm watching a programming tutorial. This is one of my first programming tutorials that I'm watching. And the guy in the video said, if you want to execute a Python script, what you do is you say Python, and then you say, I don't know, main.py, if main.py is a file here. Now I run this and I see Python was not found. Run without arguments to install from the Microsoft Store. What does that mean? I don't want to install it from the Microsoft Store. The guy in the video said install it from the official Python website. So what can I do here? Now, instead of rushing into the comments section and copying your error message and saying, hey, Python was not found, what to do? Because that's one of the most annoying things that you can do. There are stupid questions. Not every question is stupid. There are also intelligent questions and questions that are understandable. But if you get an error message and the first thing that you do is you go into the video's comment section and you paste that error message, copy paste that error message in there and ask what to do, that's not a very intelligent thing to do. People are going to dislike you very quickly, and it's also not going to help you a lot because people are most of the time going to ignore you if the answer is that obvious. First of all, if you don't know anything about the Windows system, which is normal for beginners, if you don't do a lot with computers, you probably don't know what the path variable is. However, just copy that error message here. Just go ahead and copy part of it, open up your web browser, and then paste it into Google. Go to google.com or paste it into the browser and type Python was not found, blah, blah, blah. And then you can see stackoverflow.com. That's the first thing that you can see here. Python was not found. And when you scroll down in the answers here, the best answer says you don't have the command Python installed to your path on Windows, which is the default if you didn't get your copy of Python from the Windows Store, or if you didn't check the add Python to your path checkbox. Now, with one Google step and clicking on the first link, going to the first answer, you now know what the problem is, that you don't have Python in your path variable. Now, in this particular answer here, the guy doesn't tell you how to do it, how to add it. So what you do, instead of going to the comment section and asking, how do I add Python to my path variable, you open up a second tab and you type Python add to path, or how to add Python to path, whatever. You go to the first site and you can see a guide on how to add Python to the Windows path. So you can either do it with run system.cpl, system properties, environment variables, and so on. Here you have the explanation of how to do it. If that explanation doesn't help for some reason, because not every link is useful, what you do is you open up the second link and you see what this guy has to say. Okay, first of all, you can do it with the installer by checking that checkbox, and then you can go down here and if you already have installed it, you can just go ahead and manually add it. So you just type path, and you can see edit system environment variables. You follow the steps. You can see environment variables here, of course. I deliberately changed everything from 3232, so this is obviously not a valid path, so I just have to reset it here. But if you never have installed Python or added it to the path, you just have to do it as shown in those tutorials here. And it took like 1 minute to find, or actually it took like 10 seconds to find the right answer. It took about 1 or 2 minutes to implement the answer to solve the problem. And this is a very basic example here, but this is the first step. Instead of asking the questions immediately when you get an error message, and this doesn't have to be something like Python is not recognized. It can also be some error in your code. Maybe it says you cannot use NumPy because the version is not the right one. Or maybe you have Python 3.9 and it says, okay, TensorFlow doesn't work. And instead of asking, why does TensorFlow not work for me, ask Google why TensorFlow might not work for you, paste the error message, and then you're going to probably find something on Stack Overflow. Because the fact is that if you have a problem, unless you're operating in a very, very small and narrow niche, there is probably almost 100% someone that already had the problem, and most of the time they have figured out a solution already. Or maybe you come to the conclusion that this problem is not solvable because hardware or because the software just doesn't have this functionality. So whenever you have a problem, and this problem is not in a very, very narrow niche, just Google it. Chances are that someone else has had the same problem and they solved it already. Now, before we carry on, I want to show you that the same thing can happen in Python. Let's say you watched a tutorial on default arguments. You saw that like that, you can define default parameters. And you now want to do the same thing and you want to experiment around and you say, okay, I want to have an additional parameter here. And then all of a sudden you get an error message because Python tells you non-default argument follows default argument. Now, we all know, for those of you who know Python, that this is not the right way of writing this. But let's say you don't know that because you're a beginner and you're watching a tutorial and the guy doesn't mention that you have to put all of those in the end, all of those default arguments in the end. What you can do here, first of all, is read the error message. Oftentimes, the error message already tells you what's going wrong. Non-default argument follows a default argument. This is a default argument. This is a non-default argument. This is probably not allowed in Python. However, if you still don't know what to do, you just open up your web browser and you say non-default argument followed whatever, and then Python. You don't even need to type the full error message. And then you can see, okay, why can't non-default arguments follow default arguments, or syntax error non-default argument follows default argument? This guy has a problem here, and the answer, let me clarify 2 points here. And he explains why this is not possible, how this is not possible. You can also just read the documentation, which is another tip. But the fact is that those simple error messages, at least those simple error messages, can be Googled easily. So whenever you follow along with one of my tutorials or with the tutorials of someone else, and you get an error message that is, not the most complicated error message on earth, Google it. Google it and go 2 steps further, 3 steps further. If, for example, you have a more sophisticated error message like this module is missing, then you're installing that module and there is a problem with installing that module. Google that problem as well. Then by solving that problem, you discover a third problem. Google that problem as well. This is how you learn. This is how Linux users feel all day long. You want to install something, you want to configure something, oh, it doesn't work. Why? Because of that error. Google that error, see, this is how you solve that error. What you do is, while solving that error, you also see that you encounter a second error and so on. This is the same. This is why so many people think that Linux is complicated or that Arch Linux is complicated. Because you need to do all those things on your own. You need to try something, most of the time it won't work, and then you need to try another thing, and you need to Google, and you need to ask in forums, or you need to Google into forums and see what people have already struggled with and how they solved it, and there's everything. Every problem has a solution, almost every problem. And I highly doubt that a beginner learning Python has some problems that no one else has had in the past. Now let's stop ranting for a second and talk a little bit about how to Google properly, because sometimes some problems are a little bit more complex to solve. They're still Googleable. You don't need to ask questions right away. You can still try to solve the problem on your own, not just because you're not annoying someone else. This is not a passive-aggressive video here because I'm annoyed or something. I'm not annoyed because, if I see a question that's reasonable, most of the time I'm going to answer it. If I see that a question is easily Googleable, I'm just going to ignore it. So this is not a video where I'm telling you stop asking me questions. This is not that kind of video. I'm just saying that by Googling, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to actually become a better programmer. You're not just going to solve the problem on your own without the help of anyone else. You're going to learn a lot of skills on the way. For example, the vidstream module that I have programmed, I programmed this module because I wanted to stream camera data and screen sharing data via Python, via networks. And while doing that, I discovered that, hey, it doesn't work as simple as just setting up sockets, sending and receiving. You need to pack the stuff. You need to use structs and packing. And while I was researching how this works, I learned a lot. And I didn't just ask questions, right? I Googled through different repositories on GitHub, through Stack Overflow questions, and then I learned how to solve the problem. And this is what I want for you. I want you guys to figure out a way how you can solve your own problems, because by doing that, you're going to learn a lot. But let's talk a little bit about some advanced Googling methods, even though most people nowadays actually know them, especially in the IT field. But let's say, for example, we want to do audio streaming in Python. So let's say Python Arch, and we want to do this on Arch Linux. Python Arch Linux, or actually let's do the Arch Linux example later on. But let's say we want to have Python audio streaming. That's it. You want to have Python audio streaming, and you see, okay, the first one says Pi audio, and then you see a bunch of other links, let's say with Pi audio, and for some reason you don't want to use Pi audio, maybe because you don't like it, maybe because it doesn't work on your system, whatever. And every single thing that you see here is Pi audio. Let's just say everything is Pi audio, and you don't want to have Pi audio as a possible solution. Now, of course, you can try to say without Pi audio, but you're just going to get more Pi audio because you included Pi audio in your search term. So what you can do here is you can actually use an operator, which is the minus sign, so the subtraction symbol, and then you can just add Pi audio here. By doing that, you're going to search for this, but you're going to filter out all the results where Pi audio is included. So as you can see here, when you scroll through this, there is not a single website here which has Pi audio in its text, in its website. Now, of course, you're limiting your search results by a lot, but by doing that, you exclude all the results that have Pi audio in the result, if you want that. So this is one way that you can filter out if something is very popular and you're looking for a more niche solution, you can actually go ahead and do that. Now, you can also do it the other way around. Let's say, for example, you want to have something for show. So let's have a very narrow search term. Let's say Python audio, or actually not audio. Let's say, or actually do Pi audio. Python audio, Arch Linux streaming, and I want to use Pi audio this time. So if we want to do that, I get a lot of results here, but I also have a lot of search terms. And this here, for example, it says it doesn't have streaming. And some other results might say they don't have Arch, or they don't have something else. So if you want to have a term in that result for sure, so if you want to definitely have streaming, for example, you just have to surround it with quotation marks. By doing that, Python audio, Arch Linux, streaming in quotation marks, Pi audio, all those words around streaming are going to be optional, but still we're going to try to find them. But definitely streaming has to be part of it. So by doing that, we're only going to get results that include streaming. This is one little hack that you can use. Now, another thing that I want to show you here is sometimes you're going to Google stuff like, why should I learn Python? Let's do it like that. And you're going to get a lot of different results from some blogs and from Medium sometimes, and from Quora and from Stack Overflow. And let's say what you're looking for is not really a professional answer, but you want to have more like a chat with some other programmers. And you know that you can find this on Reddit. Now, first of all, of course, you can just go ahead and type Reddit. But if you don't want to type just Reddit, but you really want to limit yourself to the Reddit homepage, to the Reddit website, you can type in URL, and then you can type reddit.com. By doing that, you're limiting your results to reddit.com, and you only get reddit.com results. Of course, you can do this if you have another question. You can also filter to just get Stack Overflow, and now you only get Stack Overflow responses. So this is one way that you can search websites. This is a very useful way. And yeah, by doing that, you can actually target specific pages and you can target specific forums if you know that your solution is probably going to be there and not on Quora, for example, or on Medium. Now, one little hack that I want to show you here is also that sometimes you're going to look for code. So sometimes you're not going to look for information, but for actual code. So let's say we're looking for binary tree in C++. Let's say we're looking for that. Now, we got a lot of different websites here, Geeks for Geeks, C programming, just some tutorials, but let's say we're actually looking for C++ files. If we're looking for the file type CPP, I can just go ahead and say file type CPP, like that. And now by doing that, I will get nothing but C++ files. So if I open this, I get a C++ file here with the code. If I open the second one, I'm also going to get a C++ file. I'm not going to get anything but C++ files here because I'm filtering for C++ files. Now, of course, I can also remove the C++ here, and I can add Python here, and I'm going to get binary tree in Python. Now, of course, this is a very, I probably have to do something like binary tree search or anything like that when I'm looking for a specific algorithm. With file type py, I'm going to get Python script. So here, if I open this up, I'm going to get a Python file here. So this is how you look for specific file types. Now, last but not least, I want to talk about some questions that are more soft and not necessarily something like how do I solve this problem or how do I add Python to the path variable, but stuff like, for example, how do you run Ubuntu on Windows? Like this terminal here, what is this? Or what is your editor? Or what browser are you using? And those questions are quite simple to answer if you, instead of asking in a comment section, you just Google for 20 seconds. So for example, if you're wondering how I set up Linux or this Ubuntu terminal on Windows, you just open up your web browser, and what you do is you say Ubuntu terminal on Windows how, for example. And the first thing that you get is how to install and use the Linux bash shell on Windows, or install Ubuntu on Windows 10. Oh, Windows subsystem for Linux, what's that? And you have the answers. You have tutorials on how to do that. Second thing, what is the editor that I'm using? Now, if I don't have any hints, and I do have hints in my videos, if I don't have any hints on which editor I'm using, you can just try to say best terminal editors. And you can probably see, okay, it's probably Vim or it's Emacs, and then you can compare the design and the stuff that I'm typing or most popular terminal editors. But besides that, oftentimes what I'm doing is I'm opening up the editor. So I'm not necessarily saying, okay, this is this editor, but I'm saying, okay, nvim, for example, and then a file name. And then all of a sudden the editor is opened. So what you can do is you can go to Google and type nvim editor. What is that? And you can see this is, okay, first of all, we get Vim, but I want to instead search for nvim. This is also another thing. Sometimes it's going to show you results for something else than what you typed. If you want to see your actual search query, you type search instead for, and you can see NeoVim. Okay, what's that? We can go to the NeoVim homepage, and you can see that this is probably the editor that I'm using. Then people also ask me which browser I'm using. This icon down here, now you cannot see the name anywhere, but you can go ahead and say web browser lion logo. And you get the Brave web browser. Wow. So whenever you have some basic questions like that are not very complicated, just Google them. It's very simple. You can see this is a lion down here. And even if you don't know that this is a lion, you can just Google list of web browsers. And sometimes you're not going to get the result right away. For example, here we can see web browsers, Google Chrome, Firefox, Opera, and so on. You cannot see the Brave browser. I mean, you can see it here, but you can't see the logo, so probably you're not going to think necessarily that Brave is what I'm using. But then if you don't find the answer, you can just add Orange to it, for example. List of web browsers, Orange, logo, for example. And then you can see, okay, this is the logo that I'm looking for. I'm clicking on it, and then you can see the Brave browser basics, and you know that I'm using Brave. So this is not too complicated. You should just take the time and Google for 20 seconds, and you're going to find the answer. Alright, so that's it for today's video. I hope this didn't come across as too aggressive or annoyed, because the only reason I'm making a video like this is because I want you guys to become better programmer. And if you're always asking questions, the very simple and basic questions that you can Google in 20 seconds, like which web browser are you using, or what to do with this exception here. It tells me I'm not allowed to divide by 0. Yeah, then don't divide by 0, I guess. If you're asking questions all the time about very basic stuff, first of all, probably you're not going to get an answer, not only from me, but in general, because people will think like, why don't you Google that? But second of all, even if you get an answer, it is probably going to take some time because people have to respond and people are not 24/7 online to answer questions. Whereas if you Google it, you get the answer in 10 seconds or 20 seconds, sometimes a minute, sometimes 10 minutes, but you get it quite quickly for most problems. And also you learn a lot, which is the problem if you ask questions constantly and you just copy code. you don't learn anything. And this is a problem because most, let's say, little mistakes or most stupid mistakes that happen during coding happen because you're just copying the code that someone else has written in a video. So if you watch a tutorial from me, for example, on building an AI chatbot, and the only thing that you're doing is typing the same lines of code, you're probably going to make a typo sooner or later, and then you don't know what you did wrong because you just did the same code. First of all, if it's not working on your machine and it's working in a video, it's probably not the same code. But besides that, you should not just be copying code. You should understand what's happening behind the scenes. And if there is a problem, Google until you realize what you did wrong and what was not right, because then you become a better programmer and you learn a lot on the way. So this is just one thing that I want to tell you here, or I wanted to tell you here. Learn to Google. It's a superpower. And besides that, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video, and bye.